Starfield is finally in our hands, and today I want to talk to you about my initial impressions with Starfield, not just as an RPG, but primarily as a space game. Right now, I've had about 6 hours hands-on with it, so nowhere near enough for a full-on review, but plenty enough to give you my first genuine impressions. Now, in this first video, I really want to focus on my feelings towards Starfield as a space game, and that means I won't be focusing very heavily on the RPG elements. I also want to point out, just to set expectations straight, that this video will involve me rambling a little bit, and yes, that means the video is unscripted and the editing of the footage is going to be a bit rough and ready. Now, as I've said over the past few months and perhaps the past few years, when it comes to Starfield, we shouldn't be expecting it to be a full-on space sim. It's not a space simulator by any stretch of the imagination. And now I've had hands-on experience with it, I can confirm that definitely is the case. However, that said, it very much is a space game. Some of you may be wondering at the differences between a space sim and a space game, so very quickly let's go over that. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. Suffice to say that, generally speaking, a space sim is a simulation of flying a spaceship and the world it exists in. This means that the ship itself is pretty much fully simulated or semi-simulated, as is the environment around it. That could be the planets, the environment, as well as the economy and other such things. A space game, meanwhile, is generally any type of game, any genre of game that is set within space, and usually it gives you some access to a spaceship. And that brings us to Starfield. This is very much a space game, and a pretty darn good one at that. However, there are a fair few restrictions in the game that really do limit the full-on potential of what it could be and what it could achieve. First then, let's start with those spaceships. Now, as I said, I've only played about 6 hours at the moment, and that means I haven't yet got hands-on with fully customizing or rebuilding spaceships. So far, I've only used the default spaceship, the Frontier. Nonetheless, this is more than enough to get a good grasp of how the flight model works. The good news for space sim fans is that the flight model is not full-on arcade. Indeed, it will take you a bit of time to actually get used to flying the ship, and there are plenty of actual physical skills to get used to and to improve. Similar to other space-themed titles such as Elite Dangerous, you do have some power management where you can distribute power between engines, shields and weapons. When it comes to flying the ship itself, I've done this so far with mouse and keyboard. The flight model is of the follow the cursor variant, so as you move the mouse around the screen, the ship will chase the cursor. Using W and S on the keyboard forward and back will increase your speed or decrease your speed. Meanwhile, A and D, traditionally left and right, will cause your ship to roll. In normal flight mode, there's no strafing, so you don't have any lateral or vertical thrusters. But that said, if you hold down the spacebar, this does enable thrusters. You'll then be able to have a full-on 6 degrees of freedom. What's more, holding down the spacebar enables a very basic version of Newtonian Flight. That is to say, if you're flying forwards, hold down spacebar, pivot your ship so that it's orientated backwards. The velocity of the ship, the momentum of the ship, will still carry on in its original direction. You'll then be able to adjust your course and adjust your direction through using the vertical and lateral thrusters. This means it's perfect for flying around asteroids and objects, and it's also great if you have an enemy ship on your 6 and want to turn back and face it. The moment you release the spacebar, the ship will return to normal flight model, and the thrusters will then start pushing the ship in whichever direction the ship is orientated. The bottom line here then is that whilst the flight model is far from what you might expect to find in a full-on space sim, nonetheless, I found it to be very good and something I want to get to grips with. It feels as though it will push my skills a little bit, and feels as though it's something that I need to learn to improve, and that is always a good place to be in when it comes to that type of activity. Now, moving on, I know that space game fans are going to be having a lot of questions about space itself. What is it like? How big is it? How do we move around within it? Well, this is where the aforementioned restrictions come in. Some of these are problematic, others are far less so. It's also going to be something that's a bit subjective for some people. While some people will be quite happy with it, others are quite likely to be a little bit disappointed, or maybe quite a bit disappointed. Let's talk about space itself then. From what I've been able to determine, when you leave a planetary surface and fly up into space, you'll be, well, in space except you're loaded into a large cell. Now, I don't know the size of this cell or this mini-map, and I don't know the boundaries of it, or even if there are any. The problem here is that your ship can only actually travel in, well, meters per second, up to a few hundred meters per second. So even if this map is relatively small in terms of the scale of space, it's going to take you an absolute age to get across it. That means that to all intents and purposes, when you enter space, you are bounded to the area that you've arrived in. And sometimes when you arrive in these areas, a random encounter may occur. This could be a pirate that's chasing you, a ship that's disabled or needs help, a friendly NPC ship that just wants to chat or hang out, and indeed, it could be a loot field, something for you to destroy or mine or take. Indeed, it could be a whole variety of things, and quite often, there's simply nothing there at all. But whatever you do find or don't find, whatever the case may be, you're absolutely free to fly around within that area of space. Now, I'm going to admit here that I haven't spent any prolonged periods of time flying in a straight line, so I don't know what happens if you fly for a quarter of an hour, say, in a straight line. I don't know if you'll discover some things that aren't immediately visible, or if perhaps you'll just fly endlessly without seeing anything. I don't know that. It's something that I will test later on. However, what I do know is that when you arrive in these areas of space, if you hold down the F key on the keyboard, I'm not sure what it is on the joypad, you'll bring up the ship scanner. And this will list for you all the things that you can interact with within that particular area. Now, also worth pointing out here, whilst you're in space, you can leave the seat of your ship and walk around the interior of the ship. You can interact with anything that's inside of your ship, and that includes having conversations with the NPCs that may be on board. What you can't do is leave the docking hatch and enter space itself, so no EVA activities, at least not from what I've seen so far. But whilst you can't do EVA activities, what you can do is dock with other ships and dock with space stations. In fact, if you find a disabled ship or you're able to disable an enemy ship yourself, you'll be able to dock it, board it, defeat any hostiles on board, and then take possession of that ship. Now, when it comes to wanting to travel to another area of space, here you have to enter the system map, or indeed the galaxy map if you want to travel to another star system. You then select a planet from the system map, or indeed another area such as an asteroid field or a space station or a ship, and press the X key, and you will then instantly travel to that. You then find yourself in another large area of space where you can, well, basically explore. If you want to go down to a planetary surface, you select an area on the planet, and this will give you a landing marker. You can land absolutely anywhere you want on the planet, or you can go to some of the already established points of interests. Now, the planetary surfaces themselves, I found these very, very interesting and very enjoyable. They're all pretty much different. If you go to the surface of Luna, our very own moon, it's very plain and very barren, but nonetheless, there is a stark beauty to it. It's also worth remembering that Starfield is set quite a few hundred years into our future, and that means even locations such as our moon are strewn with many different objects across the surface, and this could be just debris fields, and it can also be outposts, bases, and other points of interest. Quite often here you'll find objects you can loot. This could be weapons, resources, credits, and I'd say on perhaps 50% of the occasions you may encounter pirates or other enemies. Now, you can locate all of these points of interest simply by walking across the surface of the planet, but you can also use your inbuilt scanner. Just hold down or just tap on the F key. This will bring up some markers and you can simply walk towards these. You'll discover all the types of things. And they're not always man-made either. I've also discovered cave systems. Very reminiscent of Skyrim and Morrowind. So yeah, this too is interesting, as you never really know what you're going to encounter within those caves or within those outposts. Also, as you're walking around the planetary surfaces, you can scan both flora and fauna, and this allows you to survey the planet, building up a catalogue of the life that resides there. So that then covers the three main aspects of what I consider to be the space game part of Starfield. The flight model of the spaceships, the area in space, as well as the planetary surfaces. What I haven't talked about is the building of the ships, the building of the outposts, and resource collecting, and a few other things besides. That is going to take a lot more time and dedication to get into the game before I can really confidently talk about it. The big issue that is going to be somewhat divisive for space sim fans and space game fans is what you might expect. It's these boundaries and loading screens. For me personally, I don't have much issue with them, but I can see how a lot of people actually might. All of these are very quick, at least on my SSDs, but nonetheless they do break the flow of the game. This might not be too much of an issue to fans of RPGs, but it could well be an issue to fans of space sims, which generally offer usually a far more seamless experience. But like I said, I do think that this is going to be a bit divisive. Some people will have issue with it, others will not. Ultimately then, my final thoughts. I think Starfield is shaping up to be a very good space game. In order of my preferences of those 3 different categories I mentioned, from least favourite to most favourite, I will start with my least favourite. This is space itself, which I find is a little bit too restrictive. I'd like to see larger areas which I have a much more free form of flying. I like the ability to fly from one space station to another or through large asteroid fields. And whilst I can certainly explore the area of space that I'm loaded into, I would like to be able to travel much faster and move much further. Nonetheless, it is still a great experience. There's always something new to see and something interesting to discover. At the second spot, I'd place the flight model. This, as I said before, isn't a space sim flight model, but nonetheless it does have, well, it would require a bunch of skills and a lot of practice to get used to. Ultimately, it's not full-on arcadey, which I know some people were concerned about, and whilst it's certainly casual friendly, there's also some advanced techniques and elements that people who really love that sort of thing will want to get used to and make use of. And right at the top of the list is Planetary Exploration. Whilst there's no seamless landings here, you have to go down to the planet via a loading screen. When you're down on those planets, it really is a wonderful experience, at least I found it to be so. Of course, 6 hours of playtime is nowhere near enough to experience the sheer amount of planets that Starfield has to offer, but it is enough time to explore a different variety of worlds. Planets never feel restricted, they never feel confined, they always feel as though I'm in wide open spaces. From the landing point, it seems I can walk for about 15 to 20 minutes before hitting the edge of the map. That's the ship lands in the centre of this map, so that means from edge to edge, the map's around about 30 to 40 minutes in size at a running speed. So for me, that's not an issue. There's plenty here to explore. And I don't think most people are ever going to hit those boundaries unless they intentionally set out to do so. And for those of you who are fans of Skyrim and Fallout, those type of games, then you'll be happy to know that Starfield shares a lot of elements of those games. If you head out into the wilderness, you will have those unexpected and random encounters. It really does very much feel like exploring alien worlds. And whilst the graphics here are not necessarily to the level of many of the other AAA releases we've seen over the recent year or two, they nonetheless are a step above what we've seen from Bethesda in the past. All in all then, a really nice experience as a space game. As an RPG, I think we're going to be looking at something rather special here. Of course, it's not without its flaws, but I think it's definitely a return to Bethesda classics, and that in a good way. At any rate, I've rambled on enough here. Hopefully it's good enough information for you to get a good feel of what to expect from Starfield as a space game, as well as giving you some insights into my thoughts and feelings towards the game. Do let me know what you think about what I've said, as well as what your experiences are with the game if you've played it already, in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.